Hello again. I'm really glad that you're here supporting Almina and her topic testing in React. I just have a couple of things to say before we officially start. First of all, I'm really glad Almina is doing this. She's been with us for 7 years. Her 7th anniversary was in May. And Symphony will say more about it, but it was your first working experience, as I know, and we're still going strong, which is amazing. Regarding the presentation, Almina will hold it first. You can ask all your questions in the chat box and in the Q&A box. Also, if you want to ask something, unmute yourself. You will have to raise a hand, but please leave that for the end of her presentation so we can cover all questions at once. Yeah, she will not stop her presentation until the very end, and then we will do the Q&A part. We will try to cover as much questions as possible, hopefully all of them, but yeah, we'll see how we are with timing. Almina, also, before she starts, you will have all material sent to you in the following couple of days via email. That is the presentation, the recording of this meetup, and any additional material Almina presents. So that's enough for me. I think I will mute myself now. Almina, good luck, and you can start. You can share your presentation now.
Thank you, Mirima. Welcome everybody to my first meetup ever. I hope you will enjoy and we will together learn something new. As Mirima said, I'm Almina and I'm in Symphony for 7 years now. That was my first work experience as software developer. I actually started as Android developer and was working on that for 3 years. And then I looked up for some new challenges and decided for web development. And currently I have 4 years of experience, mostly in React. And in last year, I'm trying to be a full stack developer to find my place there, working with Java and React. Since I have a lot of experience in React and also in testing, actually I started with tests in my React applications from the beginning. And now I have also 4 years of experience there. I decided to share this knowledge with you, even if I'm not really comfortable with this kind of presentations. But I think it's good to share knowledge in some moment and maybe help you guys to make testing a routine in React. If you're already testing to maybe improve something, or we can learn something new, or if you're not testing or you actually don't like that part of the job, maybe to make it a routine and get comfortable with it. So this is some kind of content that I'm going to present. There are 10 topics, but I'm not sure how much I can put in 1 hour. But let's try to complete everything. At first, I will just say who is this talk aimed at, just to make you interested in this topic. I think you're already interested because you're here, but let's just check if you are in the 3 key points there. Then before we start anything to talk about testing, we should first know why testing matters, because I know a lot of developers usually don't like tests and they think they're difficult and maybe boring to write. I will try to explain and give you really good reasons why should you test your applications in React. Then we're moving forward and going to topic setting the stage. Actually, this is setting the stage for tests. There are some steps that should be completed before you start to work on tests. Even if you are a freelance developer or working the team, maybe I'm be more focused on teams, but we will figure out how it works for freelance developers too. If we want to test, we need to know what should we test. And I will explain some good and bad practices there and how you can decide what is good to test in your application. To cover those tests, we need some kind of tests, some types of tests. So basically, I think a lot of you knows about type of tests, you heard of them, but I will just go briefly through them and say a few words about each. After types of tests, actually we need some tools to work with to implement our tests. I will share what is the most popular tools, what are the most popular tools and the tools that help me in my development. For this meetup, I decided to share knowledge about the React testing library, and that is topic that I'm going to be focused on, just to show you the best practices and the really powerful methods from React testing library. That is currently, I think, the most used library for testing in React. And usually we cannot do any testing without mocking data or module because we are testing locally. We are not using the real browser and connection to our endpoints. So I will show you how to mock data or module or any function, but also explain how much should we mock and what's actually the good parts of application to mock. Also, I would like to share some tips and tricks. I think those are really useful and everyone loves tips and tricks just to speed up the development, in this case, test development. And the output of all these topics is something that is related to test coverage. Test coverage is actually testing metric related to tests. And this is the output that we can show to anyone, and maybe just like a proof of our test, how our tests are valuable. Yeah, I think now we can go and start with who is this talk aimed at. If you're a person in IT interested in testing in React, or actually you just work with React, but you never had any tests, or I don't know, you're just starting and you didn't have any chance to test, it's good you're here. Also, front-end developers who need to start testing, just hooking up and preparing, I think you can learn a lot from this meetup. I know they're going to be really experienced developers. Maybe you have more experience than me, but let's share some experiences and maybe in Q&A session make some discussions about the tools that we use. I also like to see QA engineers here. Because you could see how is testing done from front-end side. So when you test when you run your automation tests or testing manually, you know what's already covered from front-end part. Well, this is the topic that I think you will get interested in and after this, you will be ready to start your tests. So in everyday development, you have some new features, you have existing code base, and if complex systems means more interaction between functions, it's easier for unforeseen problems to arise. So what it means, for example, you're working for 1 year on your project, and you have your tests, and new features come to your code base. If you had tests and you start to develop new features, if you tackled anything related to old code and you start your tests, maybe tests are going to fail and show you what happened in the existing code base. It means that testing ensures future development does not break existing code. This is not just something that I say like this, and this is a statement and that's all. Actually, from my experience, I can tell you that lately in my team, we had to change a moment library. It's daytime library. I think you heard about it. We should change that to some other library, like I think date-fns. And if we didn't have tests, we would spend a lot of time trying to figure out if some change broke existing implementation. And since we had the tests, as a developers, we just run tests after each change and check if everything's fine. That reduces the time that QA engineers had to spend doing manual and automation testing. And also we had a less stress after we pushed that code to develop. The next is it prevents reappearance of a bug. If you ever had a bug, I think we all had some bugs. If you had bug in development or production, wherever else, or some other environment, and okay, you fix that bug and you push to environment, and okay, QA team tests that bug, everything's fine, everything works, okay, we are good. But after a few weeks, if you're in the team, someone tackled the code that's related to bug that was there before, and QA reports the same bug again. I figure out this after a few times that I got the same or almost same bug from the same environment. And since I work in the team with a lot of people, we are not sure, and we have a large code base, we are not sure if we broke something by working on our new features. So if you write a test for a bug that appears and test similar test cases, you'll be sure that the same bug does not appear again. As a developer, it makes you more confident about features you deliver. You know, when you push your code to develop, and if you don't have tests, you actually cannot be really sure if everything's fine. And yesterday, I think when I pushed my code to develop some new feature, I just talked with QA team, and the girl that works as QA engineer told me there's one minor bug, and I said, okay, it shouldn't be more bugs because I really covered everything by the tests. And I think that was the case at the end. So I'm really more confident about features that I deliver. Tests can represent some kind of documentation. What this means, if you have a new team member in your team, you will get all documentation, explain business logic, prepare some demo for new team member just to meet technical requirements, business logic, and so on. But if tests are written correctly, and if you have describe blocks in tests that are used to describe the component or module that you're testing, and if a test has great description, and since you there have some assertions and checking what code does, then the team member can learn a lot from your tests and be sure how business logic is connected, especially in integration tests. It can be a client requirement. I want to talk too much about this, but if you're working with some client, you can be required to ensure some level of test coverage. Test coverage is actually the output of the measurement of the test that we write. And company best practices. I think whoever works in company, they're trying to deliver stable and bug-free code and have some standards, and maybe also require some percentage of test coverage. I hope now you understand why it's good to have tests and why you should spend your time on this. Okay. This is just a short graphical presentation of my topics, previous topics. So team, client, and company satisfaction is at the end some sort of best value that you can have from your tests. So it's not just for company or client. Maybe we just sometimes think, okay, client requires something. No, as team, you are more confident in your code and you have less stress because at the end you have less bugs reported, or at least less serious bugs are critical. Okay, now when we know why should we test, we should start setting up the stage for tests if you didn't have that test previously. If you're starting project from the scratch, you should take care to include testing estimation. So usually we estimate our stories just based on implementation, but you will need some time also for tests. Basically, at the beginning, you will need more time, but later on, maybe you will reduce the time needed for tests, and you will not count each time on tests when you're giving your estimation, because you already have some tests and you just need to fix a few of them. Set the goal for test coverage that can be reached without frustration. This is really important for existing projects that does not have doesn't have tests. Because if you got a requirement to set some test coverage, for example, it's a requirement to have 80% of test coverage in your application, and you didn't have before any tests, you should decide to just set the lower goal for your tests. For example, we will write new features with 80% coverage, but for all features, we will just take them as technical debt, or we're just trying to reach coverage step by step. So once you have new features covered, it's much easier to go back to to old code and add step by step some test coverage there. You should choose testing framework or library based on latest best practices and experience of team members. When I started with testing 4 years ago, I had the Enzyme was only, I think, I'm not sure, React testing library was also there. Yes, but Enzyme was really popular, and I didn't think about React testing library. I think I should investigate better about that and ask each team member about their knowledge, and maybe just to ask other colleagues about experience like this meetup, or just to have some demo sessions with people who writes tests. So this is a good step to do before you start. Make sure each team member is capable to write tests. Yesterday I met my friend, and I told him about this meetup, and he asked me about topic. I said it's testing in React. He's also a developer, and he told me, I asked him what's wrong. Well, I don't like to write those tests. Why? I think they're really hard to implement. Well, I think it's not like that. It's really easy, and that's the reason why you should talk to each member and make them comfortable and capable to write tests, so that they don't hesitate to start with tests on any feature. You should make an agreement about types of tests, since this is often a topic between team members. What types of tests should I have? And it's everything based on your project. Someone would have more unit tests. For example, if you're making some library, or someone will have more integration tests if you have a big and complex business logic, and so on. So you should just talk about this and make some agreements. And after that, you're ready to, after you choose the library and so on, you should install required dependencies and set up the testing framework. This is all related to framework you choose, and it's usually a really easy to complete. Okay. Well, after we have everything set up, we should think, what should I test now? Okay, I have my code, and what should I test? I will share a few correct or recommended and incorrect or avoid if possible options. I don't want to say this is something you should do. This is from my experience, and I think it's good or bad. So after this, we can have a discussion and talk about these items if needed. So the most important is to test overall app functionality. If you test each component separately, and you don't test the overall functionality from login to user events with application and so on, you don't have actually the real value from your tests. Some don't have real benefits. And this is something that should be covered. We should test user events. Why? Because on that way, we're doing the same as user does. So by simulating user events like click, scroll, and so on, we are doing good things, because that's something that user will do. We should test common functions and helpers. In my application, I think almost each application has the same. I have a lot of helpers and functions, something that's common to few components, and I'm used the same functions and helpers across the application. They should be tested really well, because they could make a mess if something is wrong. They could make bugs in multiple components and multiple screens. We should test different users, roles, and permissions. This is something also that I missed a few times. I got new feature, and it depends on multiple roles and permissions. And I used to test only the major roles that I know about, and I forget about other roles. Please take care about all these cases and test them well, and you will get really benefits from that. We should test edge case scenarios actually, and errors handling. It's easy to when you write your component, you already know about a happy path, how should some component work, and that's it. But what if you have something that's not expected from your side, for example, data that's not formatted well from API response, or empty response, or some undefined value, or something like that? You should test all these cases in your tests. If you have all these completed, I think your test will have a great value. On the other side, what should you avoid if possible? I said if possible, it depends on your project also. It's not the same for all projects. You shouldn't test implementation details. Why? Because implementation detail, so implementation component, can change anytime. So if you go to access your state, or just to go to props and manually invoke any prop on component instance, that's not valuable, because the implementation can change. Internal state and props can change, but input and output should stay the same. I say input and output from user perspective. So if users fill out the form and click submit, you should test only these steps. You shouldn't go internal state of your component. As I already said, manual accessing functions passed in props. So you make instance of your component in test and access props and just calling those functions. You could do all that, all these testings from clicking like user clicks on your application. You shouldn't test third-party libraries also, because even if you test their implementation, you cannot do too much there, because they're outsourced, and you already can see reported bugs and so on. So whatever library you take to work with, you already know about bugs and pros and cons. So avoid testing third-party libraries. They're not related to your application, and they can be changed anytime. And also, do not make too many fake or mock components. If you do this, you will lost a lot of real implementation, and you're testing your application from your perspective. So if you mock something, you will mock in the way that you think it's correct. So maybe you will miss to handle some errors if you're mocking component, or you will mock a data that's not really expected anytime. There are a lot of more should I test this or not topics, but I think for this time it's enough for some start. Yeah, I'll just go briefly through the types of tests. I know everyone knows about this mostly. So Snapshot is at the bottom because it's easier to write, and it ensures UI does not change unexpectedly. Okay, you have your component, you're just creating a snapshot file. And if this snapshot test, if that file is changed, you made some changes in your style or something like that, the saved snapshot file is compared to a new one, and you will get test failures if anything is changed. I'll explain more about this later. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the next one here is unit test. Unit test singles function or React component or module in isolation. The real important part is in isolation. That means no side effects, no testing component integrations, only the component that you're testing or function. You may be confused by testing module is unit test. Well, somehow it is, because you're testing the module that is dependent only on their internal components. Nothing outside is tested. maybe you could have only unit tests to test module. They're easy to write, and you don't need to spend a lot of time. I will also show that later. For example, you're testing custom input field and no interaction with your form or something like that. Just custom wrapper around your field. And the next is integration. Integration tests multiple functions or React components or modules and their interaction. Also, the most important part here is their interaction. They're helpful in testing app stability and business logic, because that's something how user would test some components in integration. For example, you have some list and you're fetching data from the backend, and you're just showing spinner while data is loaded, then data is shown, and you have infinite scroll on the list. If you're testing these together, then you have integration tests. At the end, we have end-to-end tests. They're mostly related to QA team, and since they're not related to this meetup, I just leave that to QA team. Yeah. Okay. I already said I will show you some snapshot example, and this is the screen. You can briefly check what's happening here. So, as you can see, I have some timeline component. The timeline component is a really simple one. It's just horizontal line with some steps on that horizontal line. Some steps are completed and color different, and the other steps are not completed and just have a mark on the line. So what I do here, I use a React test renderer to render the React component to pure JavaScript object. And then I use just snapshot testing feature to automatically save a copy of JSON tree to a file. You see file on the left. And after I run my tests, each time this saves snapshot, it's saved only first time. This snapshot is compared to next tree that is rendered. This is only the content of this timeline snap file is just a stringified version of JavaScript value from this object here. And that's it. Yeah, there is a structure, and this is my tests folder, and snapshot is automatically saved by Jest. I will explain Jest later also here in snapshots folder. Okay, so I went to my timeline component and changed some style, or I changed some implementation. Or maybe I could use some global style in my timeline component and then change that style. I wasn't aware if that affects my timeline component. If I didn't have tests, I'll push the code and maybe that style will affect timeline and I will get reported, bug reported. Here, since I started my run my timeline tests again, snapshot test, I got the results and I see that in yellow, I can see the content before. And in white color, I see the new content. Here, I have option to click to update snapshot, or I can just go to check if my change was unintended. Here you can see that stringified version, and here are the changes. You can see that on line 16. After this, I can just rewrite my snapshot with new values, or I can just skip my changes in style. Okay, that was snapshot test, but what about unit tests? I will also show simple color picker component. This is just 4 buttons, and I have some colors there. And if color is selected, I just see this check mark here. The initially selected color is the first one. And you can see a code here. It's really simple. I use some my wrappers around text and box, and just rendering buttons that are from some map and showing checkmark icon if I need to show if color is selected. On the right, you can see the unit tests for this component. I have 3 tests here. The first one is only the render, and this checks only if component is rendered correctly, if there's no any errors in component. Since I use TypeScript, I usually don't need this test because TypeScript handles it all, and that's it. On the test below, you can see that I'm just using queries, just finding nodes in my color picker component. And just I'm expecting to see the first color to be in document, check mark to be in first color, and that's it, no other interactions. In second test, I'm just clicking on some other color and checking if a check mark is moved to that button, which is clicked. And that's it, no interactions, and we have a unit test. I hope it's pretty much clear now. I will skip integration tests for now because I want to show them with React testing library. Since we don't have too much time, I will go briefly through Jest, Enzyme, and React testing library, and I will then focus on React testing library as a tool. I think you already heard about Jest. It's a JavaScript testing framework. Also, it's test runner that lets you access the DOM via GSDOM. GSDOM is actually the same, implemented in same, it has the same functions as DOM, and enables us to run our tests without browser, just using the functions from a real DOM. So with Jest, you can test, find tests and run tests. You can get the report if test is failed or successfully completed. You can configure which test to run if some of them need updates. And you can set up your environment, as I said, for your setup. You can enable mocks and assertions, all this from Jest. And Jest, I think it's pretty much enough for some basic testings. Then I will show you Enzyme. This is the library that I worked for maybe 3 years, even more. And I really liked that library, but in the meantime, I figured out I'm testing too much my state variables and props. And I have a lot of issues with async operations. I had to wrap everything that is wherever I have a use effect, I had to wrap with act. That's resolved in Enzyme latest versions, but in the meantime, I found some other tools. But let's just briefly say what is Enzyme. It's a library that makes possible to write assertions and simulate actions that confirm whether the UI is working correctly. It's based on testing component implementation. I already told you that I don't like this, but it works and you can test your components this way too. It provides the access to the components properties such as state and props, and requires Enzyme adapter React, which is not officially supported for React 17. This was the large issue for me because we wanted to move to React 17. We were not able because our tests were written in Enzyme, and there's no officially a version for React 17. What to do there? Well, we just use some unofficial React adapter. Meanwhile, we are moving to React testing library. So I do not recommend to use that unofficial plugin. It works, but I'm not sure how it will be maintained. I just wait for some for React official React 17 adapter, or maybe move to React testing library. Yeah. You need this adapter, I forgot to mention, because Enzyme is supposed to work like APIs that are not dependent on React, and they made Enzyme adapter just to resolve dependencies with React changes. A React testing library is a library that I really like to use. It's a set of helpers that let you test React components without relying on their implementation details. It's actually because of this, it's a replacement for Enzyme, and it's focused on testing user events instead of component implementation. I will show you later on how it works. And the good thing is also that we can directly install library and we're good to go. But if you use TypeScript, we just need to install types additionally. Yeah, you can see a trends related to React testing library and Enzyme. Since Enzyme is created 2015 and React testing library is created 2018, if that's a big difference, in the last 6 months, you can see that testing library has a more and more NPM installs. So I think it's getting a really great community. Yeah. And the next, I think the half of my presentation will be related to React Testing Library. I want to show you how it's easy to write tests with React Testing Library and how you can make a routine with using this library and does not have any issues with your testing. The parole of React Testing Library is that the more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they give you. That's actually true. The only valid output at the end is how much your software is tested. So there are some pros and cons related to React Testing Library. The best from React Testing Library is that that's focused on it's not focused on implementation details. So you're testing from user perspective. It also works with any testing framework. You can use it not just with Jest, with any other framework. And it's querying the DOM for nodes in a way that's similar to how the user finds elements on the page. This is really easy to use, and I will show you in examples in the next slides. It's also simple and understandable. I noticed that my tests are really more simple, and I have less lines of code when I use React Testing Library. And project is also shipped with Create React app, and you have out-of-the-box support if you're using Create React app. I also want to say some cons. Even if I like this library, there are some cons. The first is that it does not support a shallow render. Instead, you can mock child components. A shallow render enables you to render just one level deep of your component, and React Testing Library does not provide this. Why shallow render is good at all? Because your tests are going to run faster, and you also not testing child components. You're just testing one level of your component. Instead, you can just use mocks to mock components inside your component that you're testing to maybe imitate like shallow render. It also does not provide access to components props and state. I put this as some cons, even if I like this approach, but people may be used to use components, props, and state for testing, so it could be a cons. Okay, I think the funny part comes now. In one example, I will show you the best from React Testing Library. I have a login page with a button that just when you click with one icon, when you click on icon, it shows input field and submit button. And after that, I expect that user is landed to a home page. On the home page, I have a text which is indicating that. So what are we doing here? We're just using the render method from the React Testing Library. This render method returns a lot of queries from React Testing Library, such as get by text, find by role, and they are used for finding DOM nodes. It also can return a container. A container is just a containing DOM where this component is rendered, and that's usually div. And it can return a base element. Base element where this containing DOM is placed is document body. So it's appended to document body, but you can also change that if you pass parameter to this render function and set it to something else. As you can see here, I'm looking for my login icon. How do I do that? I'm using get by test ID from React Testing Library. They provided this query since there are some elements on UI that you cannot query like user would access them. So no text, no some role that is related to element type and so on. So I use get by test ID and I attach to my icon data test ID attribute. Also notice here that React Testing Library exports screen object, which has every query pre-bound to document body. So you don't need to just take get by text or other queries from render render function, you can use screen and access all of them. Okay. The next one from React testing library is Fireband. Fireband will invoke click on my login icon. It's only, please note that's only creating event and dispatching to this node, DOM node. If you want to invoke all other events that are connected with a real click event in browser, like mouse over and so on, you could use user event library from React testing library. I will show you an example later on. Okay, now when I'm sure that I clicked on my login icon, I'm just expecting to see a user test string in my input field because it's default value in my input field. And I'm using get by display value. Get by display value is usually used for form values. And I'm seeing that I'm just checking, expect is used to check if something is in document, and I'm expecting to see that input field. Okay. Next one is I'm firing change on input field. Why? Because I'm simulating user event typing into field. Also, user event could be here, can be used here, and instead fire event change, which is related to changing input value with target and value that are usually used. I could use fire user event type and just pass the DOM node and pass the value that I want to input in my field. After that, I know that my input field have new value, and I just check that with expect. And after that, I want to click on my login button. I know that I have only one button on my screen, and I'm using screen get by role to click on that to find that button, and just clicking here on button. After that, I'm expecting that my user service get token function is called. You can see on the top, I just use just spy on to mock this function and check if it's called. This just spy on will just track a number of calls to my user service get token function. And I see that it's called with parameters user email, and it's fine. And here, since I'm expecting that I'm landed to home page, I'm just expecting that I see on the screen get by text homepage. You can note here that I'm using a wait for. Why? Because in the background, when I click on submit button, I have an API call. I have spinner showing on my screen while action is completed. And then there is a transition to homepage. If I just use expect screen get by text, this test would fail. While because there are some async actions and some state updates in the background, so I need to use a wait for to wait this expect is completed. So it will just be passing test after this. Yeah. And that's basically, I think, the maybe 80% from React testing library that you would need for your tests. There are other queries, but it's really easy to figure out how they work. And I will provide some links later on. I just prepared this almost the same examples, as the previous one. But here I want you to show how to work with async code. Even if I don't have anything here that's async, I just want you to show the functions, how they work. So a React testing library provides some queries that could be used if you need to wait for element to appear on or disappear in response to event, user action, timeout, or promise. You can use find by to find text, to find role, anything else that is already accessible by other queries. So the only trick here is that you need to use await or then if you're using this find by queries. Why? Because they are returning promise. Also be careful here, because if there's no value, expected value in DOM, this test would fail. Because this find by does just returning throws an error if element is not found. what can be do with if you don't have some element? You're expecting to not have some element in your DOM. Well, you just need to use query by from React Testing Library, because query by can return null or matching node if it's found. So if I expect to not see maybe home page here, I could use screen query by text home page, and then await and use await to check if that happened. It's also, since also it's an async operation, I need to use wait for. I'm just showing here that I already got a error that this with this find by test ID, await is not used. So I will just provide some more links about these cases. This is why I like React Testing Library. It's really clear and easy to write. You just need to use their functions. You already saw that I use some mocks. I use Pion, and I want to explain why I use those. Well, just to say what is mocking for maybe someone who didn't use it before. Mocking is technique to isolate your test subjects by replacing dependencies with objects that you can control and inspect. What this means? Sometimes we, for example, for local tests, we're usually not able to set up our environment for accessing APIs. So in that case, we need to mock data that's returned from our services from backend. Then with mocks, we can capture calls, set return values, and mock implementation, whatever we want. So I will just show you a few steps how to do that. But before I start, please be careful how much you're mocking your data. It's really only when you need and when you cannot differently access your data, your component, or you need to imitate shallow rendering. So you're just mocking child components and keeping your higher order component. Okay, so what I usually mock in my tests? I mock functions, modules, and methods which are not implemented in GSDOM. I already mentioned that in GSDOM, some has all APIs like a real DOM, but some methods are still not implemented, like Windows scroll to, Windows alert, and so on. Sometimes I use in my tests, I simulate Windows scroll event. I just scroll window as a user, and I got, I think that was exception, Windows scroll to is not defined. This is something that can you mock with Jest if it's needed. Also for functions, I will show you how it can be done. For example, I have a date manipulation file, and this file exports a lot of functions that I use. By just calling Jest mock and providing a module name, you can mock all functions that are inside this file. So the real functions, when you use a date manipulation in your tests, the real functions won't be called, but mocked functions. Also, the same is from components project helper. Yeah, that's all. Also, we usually have some components that have some props. And in this case, I have comment input, a component that has input field and submit button. And I use that component in some screen. And I need to test if when user clicks on submit, on set comment function is called. Since this passes prop, I'm just mocking that function to check if it's called later on. So here, I'm just passing as a function, mock function from Jest, and later on, I'm querying my button and clicking submit. And at the last line, I'm just expecting that my send comment is called once. So if someone goes to the comment input component and change something, and send comment is not fired anymore on the submit button, this test will fail. Also, on mock functions, we can call mock implementation or mock return value if we want to make a specific implementation of these components. or functions. The one function from Jest that I really use, actually the method that I really use is pion. It's all similar to Jest function, but also tracks calls to objects. So please note that here, if I mock use pion on my user service, and I mock get token function, the get tokens function will still be called, but I just can track calls to this function. So like this, I'm just spying user service get token. So my real get token function will be called. And then I'm just, after I render my component, I expected somewhere maybe in use effect or somewhere else, I'm expecting that my get token function is called once. And after that, I'm expecting that it's saved, the current user is saved to my authentication service, because when I fetch token, I use that to save my user. If we want to mock this function to not be, so the real implementation is not used, we could just call mock function and implement here our mock function. We could do here whatever we want. So we can completely change get token function. Okay, I think I covered pretty much everything from React testing library, and I think you will like it because it's really simple. I already explained how it's useful and how it can be used in your testing. This is why in the last 6 months, I really like to write my tests, and I think the colleagues from my project also noticed that. I will share also some tips and tricks. Those are some items that I just figure out during my development time and during the writing tests. I used to place all mock data for API responses in one folder. For example, if I have some 10 services and I have 10 models related to those services, I create a mocks folder. It's based on your structure. You don't need to follow everything like I do, but I create mocks folder and place all models there. So whenever I use that model for mocking in my application, I import them from the same file, and it's easy to change anything there. So if you have mocks in separate files based on your service, then maybe you need to use that model across some other tests that are not in the same folder. It's easy to access if you have everything in one folder. There's a great tool from Jest. You can create a setup tests file and make some configuration that will be run before each test is executed. So there is a set of files after end configuration that you can add to the file. And you can just mock anything you need there. If you're constantly mocking the same module, same component, or some hooks from React, or something from React router DOM, you can just do that in setup files after end. And also you can increase or decrease your timeout per test. Just the default timeout is 5 seconds, and you can change that value because sometimes you have really large tests, integration tests that can stuck or something like that. Also, when writing snapshot tests, we covered these before, but when writing snapshot tests, be sure you're not rendering useless user interface. I had a case when I just tried to take a snapshot of one small component which has a spinner inside, and then it loads some data. I didn't wait for my spinner to remove and data get fetched, and I just saved to my snapshot spinner. It wasn't I didn't have any value from that at all. And one interesting thing is if you're using if you're using date now in your applications, and you're testing some component that is related to date now, and that component using date now function, every day when you start your test, you will get snapshot failing or your test failing. Why? Because date now is changing constantly. So it's really important and to mock all date now functions if you need to use them in the tests. And I also said about testing library, but just to mention again, because it can get a little bit frustrating until you figure out, be sure that you're using query by functions instead of get by test ID functions if you're not expecting to see something on UI. For example, you're filling out your form and click on submit, and you want to check if form is removed. Let's say if form is in some model added there. And if you're expecting not to see that form and model, please use query by test ID. The one thing that I want to mention here also is that you should avoid get querying by test ID. Why at all? What is query by test ID? Well, React testing library and its owner added get query by test ID for elements that cannot be accessed anyhow else. For example, you cannot find it by text, you cannot find it by role, you cannot find it by any other query, but just for something that's specific to that DOM node element. Then you can add data test ID attribute that is supported by React testing library to your element, and you can query by that value. But use this only if you cannot access in different way your component. And in the end, how can we measure our tests? What we did there with our tests? Well, the only indicator of how much code is tested is test coverage, and it represents the percentage of the code currently covered by tests. If we want to have coverage on our tests, we should just add coverage flag to test runner. I just want to say that sometimes you can have a 100% coverage on your components. And you say, okay, I'll well tested my application, everything's fine, but some bug occurred. What happens there? So maybe you tested all lines of code, but all these were happy pass scenarios. And you didn't test some edge cases, you didn't test errors handling and so on. So the only indicator that you have a great and useful tests is great test scenarios. You just need to think about how user would use this component, and also awareness of developers about tests they write. So if you have all of these, your application is well tested. So at the end, also all bugs cannot be covered with front-end tests. That's why we have a QA team and end-to-end tests, which are using the real APIs, the real data, and sometimes they find really important bugs, but usually they're not so critical and they don't need to be fixed immediately. This is some representation of test coverage that I took from Jazz page. So this is for you guys who never worked with this. This is how it looks. Test coverage report. So you have just the files that are covered that you tested. You have a coverage by statements, branch, functions, a lot of useful tools here that can be used. I will provide a lot of links for you to just keep learning if you didn't learn this before. And yeah, since my topic was testing in React, making it a routine. What made a testing routine for me? Well, getting known with my application, with test cases, to recognize test cases which I need to test. That's based on the topic that I said, what's good to test, what are good practices, what are bad practices. And also, when I get into React testing library, I just got really more comfortable with my tests. And I think based on whole this meetup, I think you could just start with your tests, write a few of them, and after that you will get a real feel about tests, and every next step will be a lot of easier. So that's all from my side. I tried to talk about each topic. Maybe it's too much at the end, but I hope you like it. And if you have any questions, this is the right time to start with questions. Thank you for listening. I'll stop here now.
It was amazing. You can drink water now. Well, all I saw in the comments, people really liked it. And they asked a lot of questions were about the recording. Will they get it? But now that you stop sharing your screen, you can jump to the Q&A session. You will see that there are 10 unanswered questions. Can you find?
Yeah, I see them. Should I start immediately?
Yeah, you can do it. Drink some water.
Yeah, okay. I'm okay, just talking like that. I just wanted to cover everything, so I didn't want to stop at some time because I really had a lot of to tell, and I also have more topics to talk about, but it's a really short time.
Yeah, but I think this 1 hour went by really fast, so
yeah, it was great actually.
I did. You can jump to the questions are coming in.
Okay, I'm just starting. The first one is Ali Rizvi. How do you trade off between the tests and delivery time for production? Adding more and more tests means more time to run those tests in CI, CD, and adds more time to getting code to production. Well, actually, that's true. Adding more and more tests will increase that time. But usually what we have is that we are just have few environments. We have development, like some staging environment, and then production. And we run tests on all of them. And after we just could have a build ready for our production, and then deployment is getting really fast. If you're thinking about delivery time for production, I'm not sure if you're thinking about if you need to deliver something for production and you need more time to write your tests. Well, it's everything. We agreed about that with our product owners and client. And sometimes I need to say that sometimes you don't have time to write some tests, and it's okay. You will cover that later on, because there's a lot of situations where you cannot complete everything. And I think it's pretty much fine to do that. Well, tests are something in the background, and users don't see them. I think delivering feature is much more important. Okay. Okay, the next one is Carlos Oliveira Venegas. I'm sorry about pronunciation. He says, me too, please. And what the tools you use to check the snapshot diffs? It's all built in with Jest. I use everything from Jest, so you don't need anything else besides that. So Jest is the right answer. Okay, Kalpesh Patel. In your example, I saw you're using get by test ID to find element, but it's not recommended way, not accessibility friendly. Instead, we should use get by role. Okay, what's your thought on that? Yes, I agree with that. I use that as an example, and we use get data test IDs on some elements for now. I just think about using area labels for the next releases maybe. And I will think about that, since area label is also used for accessibility, and maybe it's a good option to use. We could use get by role, but sometimes you don't have access to role. It's or maybe you have multiple elements with the same role, and you cannot distinguish the real one that you need. I hope that's okay with you. Nidhi Sharma. Hey, it's such a great webinar. I would love to get more of it. So looking forward for webinars on each type of testing in detail. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I will maybe I will make some others. Thanks. Difference between user event and Fireband. Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't have any time to figure to cover that. So the Fire event, I already explained. A Fire event, if you use click event from Fire event, it will just create an event and dispatch to the node. It will not call any other events that are usually called in browser, like mouse over, focus out, and so on. So user events has all these hooked up, and if you call user event.click, then you will get all these event called. So you can maybe it's more authentic to browser to use user event. And also, for example, user event has type, which is simulating all events that are happening on type event in input field. Okay. Not a technical question. Seems like you prefer JetBrains, WebStorm. Any particular reason? This is Kalpesh Patel. I use IntelliJ actually. I'm a full stack developer, so it's good for me as a full stack developer. That's the only reason I used it. Anonymous attendee, question for Almina. Could you recommend any resources on testing which helped you when you just started with testing? Yes, I will deliver these with presentation. I think Marima will send these in the next few days. I have really great sources, especially for Jest and for React testing library. I promise I will deliver these. Anonymous again. Okay, that's done. Sorry. Nidhi Sharma, how will TDD in React be like? I mean, writing tests first and then write code, or it's not possible in front-end development? Yeah, this was also part of my presentation. I didn't have any time to talk about it. TDD is possible in React. I tried a few times, but I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm just a lot really slow with TDD approach, test-driven development. It's hard to write because you need, when you write TDD, you need to write assertions on your node elements, and it's really hard to write those. You could use TDD to write functions and so on. That's my experience. I'm not sure if I have, maybe I'm not a good person to answer this because I didn't use it a lot. Dusan Brnic, thanks for presentation. Which approach are you using for writing tests, TDD or something else, and why? No, I don't use TDD. I'm just not comfortable with it. I'm trying to write TDD on backend. It's much easier to write backend in TDD, but I'm just not comfortable. I'm not. I don't know. I just cannot write TDD. Okay, which other metrics do you think are important in order to improve code quality in React? Well, if you work in the team, if you're thinking about code quality, you should use pull requests and learn from them as much as you can. Also, you can use some linters like TypeScript linter or ESLint to help you to reduce number of maybe bugs or to resolve some warnings about bad practices. And that's it. I usually have sessions with my team to improve my code quality, and on pull requests, we do a lot of these. Okay, Marima, do we have more time? I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, you have a lot of questions. Well, maybe take a couple more.
Okay.
Maybe you answered some of them already. We can give the option, like you can answer them later via email to the people who asked. Just let me answer all of them. I think we're going to stay another hour. But yeah, try as much as possible, and you can choose them so you don't repeat yourself. Maybe you answered some of them.
Okay, I'll try. What folder structure is suggested, either to keep the test files just near to each component or to configure just to keep those test files in one single folder, say test? Well, I don't like the other option. If you have all tests in your file, you can have a bunch of files. I use the structure. I place test folder in the same level with my component, with my folder where my component is, and I add files there. So I have in the same level in the structure test folders and my components. That way they're really close, and I write when I write tests and I check my components, it's easy to access those tests and check if a component is if I need to change something in component. It can be really messy if you have everything in tests. It's from my experience, and my team, I think, agrees with that too. We're really comfortable with this approach. Okay. Is it possible to test errors, exceptions, or negative scenarios? Yes, you can make your test fail. You can just expect your test to fail. So it's possible also from Jest, and you can use that option. I'm testing also exceptions this way, so it's okay for your test to fail. You just need to configure it to fail. Okay. test coverage report. Okay, test coverage report HTML file seems to be tricky to find out exact problem. Why the coverage is low? Is there any way to find it out easily? Well, it's no. It's no. It's not so hard to find why coverage is low. When you open your coverage file, it's HTML file. You can open it and you can just navigate to the file that you're with test coverage next to it, and it will open and show your lines. Where your code is tested and where is not. Okay, let's choose maybe some. I'm not sure I'm confident with this. In the case, I will answer this. In the case I have two components that use shared store, what is the best practice to check it if they, for example, update at the same time? In the case I have two components. Okay, I'm not sure if you can, they're not, I'm not sure if they're related to each other. If you can render them in the same time. I think they could be in some container in general. If they're not connected, then doesn't have any sense. You could render your both components in container and check if and expect if that share store is updated in both of them. Maybe you can ping me on Slack or somewhere else. We can discuss this further. It's an interesting question. Is it possible to record test runs as a video done in React and generate reports respective to the run results? I'm not sure. I didn't see this type of tests. I'm not sure. I forgot about how they called, but I think it's not possible in React. There are some other tools, I think, but not in React, as I know. I already talked about TDD. Okay. Okay, just this is a long question, but just a comment. This is comment, so I will skip this and take some questions. Will attendees get the resources? Yes, you will get resources. I will provide them to Marima, and she will send through the email. The next questions, anonymous. Should we write snapshot tests on more complex components? Great presentation, by the way. Yes, you could use snapshot tests if it's valuable. If you make a point that snapshot will be valuable to you. So it's some component that's really critical, really important. You could write snapshot there. So, but please be careful to complete all async operations in render. So you at the end you render the correct output. So if you have complex components, then usually you have a lot of state updates and so on. Please be sure to use ACT or something like that to wait for your snapshot to update. You can use that ACT there. What about testing components when we use third-party libraries for some behavior? Example, testing calendars, components for which we often use third-party libraries. Well, you can use your interaction of your components with calendar. It's okay. So it's not testing implementation of third-party libraries. For example, you have calendar on your input field, on your form, and you just need to check if you click on button, your input field will get filled in, or if it's somehow related to your application in another way. For example, you fill the calendar, you check the calendar date, and you expect on submit button to send that data on backend. You just need to check if your endpoint is called with the right data, with the correct data. Sorry, I'm just trying to answer so much questions. This is done. Do you cover security in your testing cases? If yes, how you're doing your security test? And I think they are also important since there are known vulnerabilities in. Sorry, I'm in SSR. I didn't have any cases of testing security. Really, I don't have that type of application. Everything is actually under VPN, and we are doing a lot of testing in backend. So. I'm not sure if I had any. I don't think so. I didn't have any tests. Sorry. Maybe I can research about this. Okay. How are you helping colleagues that have no less experience to get easier into testing? This is really interesting, and I think there are some colleagues that work with me that we went through this process. I usually like to write some tests, like examples, when we have some type of test that we didn't have before, something more complex or something that I learned before about. I write that test and then I share that code on my branch. I make a pull request and then I just notify them about new tests and what I did there and what I figure out, what new things are good to use and so on. I just give them that example to read and explain them maybe line by line or just telling them what I figure out there in that test. And that was a really great approach, I think, for us. I'll just close these because they're related to TDD. Yeah, thanks everyone. I think, yeah, that's it. The last question, I'm not sure I can answer.
Okay, great. I think you got them all. I kind of followed the chat box here, and I don't think all of you can see it because they are to the panelists only, but there are a lot of great feedback for you. So thank you, Almina. There were no questions, what I saw. I hope I didn't miss anything. But to all the attendees, we will send a follow-up email with all the materials, the recording, and if we missed any of your questions, you can answer with them, and we will make sure to get in touch with Almina and see if she can actually provide an answer to the additional questions. So I don't know, Almina, how are you feeling?
I feel great. I wasn't sure if I'm going to do this right way, and I'm sorry if there was too much information. I was trying to cover everything. So thank you for your support, and I'm lucky it's successful.
Yes, amazing. Thank you, Almina. Thanks to everybody participating. You will hear more from me, hopefully from Almina as well on some other session, maybe even a workshop, we don't know. But yes, that's it from our meetup. Almina, are we ready to finish this, wrap it up?
Thank you guys for watching this meetup and for your great support from all my colleagues that helped me with presentation and my team that was also focused on this. And all other persons who just was really very excited about my meetup. Thank you guys. I hope we learned something together.